Kenya plans to buy gold and store it with the Bank of England. Yes, you heard that right. A former British colony sending its gold back to London in 2025 for safekeeping. It sounds like a simple financial move, a strategy to strengthen reserves, diversify assets, and protect the shilling against a volatile dollar. But beneath that logic lies a haunting echo from the past. Because when a nation that once fought for its independence decides that its wealth is safer in the hands of its former colonizer, it raises a question far greater than economics. Officials in Nairobi say it's about security, about trusting a 300-year-old institution, the Bank of England, to guard Kenya's gold deep beneath London's stone vaults. They call it smart diplomacy. But millions of Kenyans are asking, why can't we trust ourselves? Why can't the gold that comes from African soil rest beneath African skies? What happens if one day London disagrees with Nairobi, just like it did with Venezuela when $1.9 billion in gold was frozen overnight? Because history has taught Africa one painful lesson: when your wealth sleeps abroad, it no longer fully belongs to you. Those of us who lived through the decades of decolonization remember the promise of freedom, the promise that Africa would finally hold its own keys. And yet here we are again in the 21st century, still trusting the same vaults, the same systems, the same laws that once chained us. So tonight, as Kenya prepares to send its gold to London, let's ask the question no one dares to. Can a country truly call itself independent when its treasure lies locked beneath another nation's ground? If you believe that the story of Africa's freedom is still being written, stay with us. Because what's happening in Kenya today might decide who really owns tomorrow. It began as a quiet announcement from the Central Bank of Kenya. Governor Kamal Dugg stood before the press and with calm precision declared that Kenya would begin purchasing gold to strengthen its national reserves and that this gold would be stored thousands of miles away inside the legendary vaults of the Bank of England. To most people, it sounded technical, a financial adjustment, perhaps even a smart one. We want to protect the economy, diversify our reserves, and reduce reliance on the US dollar, he said. The explanation seemed reasonable. After all, the world's markets have been unstable, the dollar unpredictable, and inflation threatening small economies everywhere. But within hours, the announcement triggered a wave of disbelief. Social media lit up. Radio callers, journalists, and everyday Kenyans asked the same question again and again. Why London? Why would a country that mines its own gold, a country that fought so hard for independence, send that gold back to its former colonial capital for safekeeping? The government's argument was simple. The Bank of England is one of the most secure and trusted financial institutions in the world. Deep beneath its stone foundations lie vaults that hold over 400,000 gold bars belonging to dozens of nations. These vaults, they said, are impenetrable. The location ideal, the system internationally recognized. Officials explained that gold stored in London can be easily traded or used as collateral during financial emergencies. Because London is the largest gold market on the planet, a country can sell, swap, or borrow against its gold within hours. It's about liquidity and trust, one central bank director told reporters. You keep your savings where the world recognizes their value. And yet that sentence, where the world recognizes their value, struck many as revealing something deeper. Because in this context, the world still meant the West. It meant that even in 2025, African nations like Kenya were being told that their wealth only holds legitimacy when it sits beneath British or Western oversight. Still, the central bank insists this is a short-term pragmatic solution. Kenya currently holds most of its foreign reserves in currencies like the US dollar, the euro, and the British pound. But those currencies can lose value often because of political or market shifts in nations that Kenya cannot control. Gold, by contrast, holds its worth. It's a hedge against crisis. The plan, according to Governor Dugg, is to buy gold from local and regional sources, from small-scale miners in Western Kenya, and from suppliers across Africa. Once refined, the gold would be shipped to London and registered under Kenya's national account inside the Bank of England. There, it would count as part of Kenya's official reserves alongside foreign currencies. But that's where the controversy deepens. Kenya doesn't yet have an internationally certified refinery, one that meets the London Bullion Market Association (LBMA) standards required for global trading. Without LBMA certification, gold refined domestically cannot be recognized as official reserves under international audit rules. So even if Kenya mined, refined, and stored its own gold at home, the world's financial institutions would treat it as unverified. In other words, Kenya's gold isn't considered real until London says it is. That paradox is what many observers find most disturbing. The government speaks of modernization, but critics see repetition, the same colonial patterns under a new name. The same justification of trust that once placed Africa's wealth in foreign hands. It's true the Bank of England offers security, its vaults have never been robbed, and its systems of auditing are among the strictest on earth. But security isn't sovereignty. The two are not the same, and once Kenya's gold is placed under British law, it also falls under British political power. If one day relations between London and Nairobi sour, or if Kenya takes a political stance that Britain disapproves of who truly controls that gold, the announcement that began as a policy decision now stands as a moral test. For Kenya, for Africa, and for anyone who still believes that independence means owning not just your land, but your wealth. The backlash came swiftly not from foreign economists or global institutions, but from Kenyans themselves. Within days, talk shows and town halls echoed with disbelief. On social media, one question trended across the nation. If our gold is not safe in Kenya, is Kenya itself safe? For many, this was not just about money. It was about dignity, the unspoken pride of a people who once fought for control over their own land, only to now surrender control over their own gold. Activists called it colonial outsourcing. Others more bluntly said it was economic self-doubt dressed in a suit. The real turning point came when commentators began drawing parallels to Venezuela. They reminded the public of what happened in 2020. $1.9 billion worth of Venezuelan gold was stored in the same Bank of England vaults. But when the British government stopped recognizing Nicolas Maduro as president, those reserves were frozen overnight. A London courtroom eventually ruled that only the government recognized by the United Kingdom had the right to that gold. That story hit home. It wasn't a distant geopolitical dispute anymore. It was a mirror held up to Kenya's future. Imagine, one Kenyan journalist said, waking up one morning to find that your own gold mined from your own soil, paid for with your own labor, no longer belongs to you because of someone else's politics. That is when the anger turned to fear. Some Kenyans defended the government's logic. We don't yet have the infrastructure they said. London is temporary. But others saw through the comfort of that argument. They pointed to Ghana's efforts to build its own gold refinery, Zimbabwe's gold-backed currency, the ZiG, and South Africa's century-old Rand refinery, proof that Africans can meet international standards without Western guardianship. If they can do it, critics asked, why can't we? The conversation evolved into something deeper, a reflection on what independence truly means. Older Kenyans who remembered the 1963 flag-raising ceremonies felt a painful sense of déjà vu. They had seen this before, the promises of sovereignty slowly diluted by policies written in foreign capitals. A retired teacher from Nakuru put it plainly, "They took our coffee, our land, and now even our trust. We can mine the gold, but we can't guard it." What kind of freedom is that? Historians began to speak out, reminding citizens that after independence, countries like Kenya were advised by the IMF and World Bank to keep their reserves in trusted global centers. Those centers were, of course, London, Paris, and New York. It was framed as economic prudence, but in practice it kept African economies tied to the same institutions that once controlled them. Kenya's decision, therefore, wasn't just about security, it was about psychology. It reflected a deep-seated colonial mindset that African systems are inherently unsafe, that Western laws are inherently superior, and that wealth needs foreign validation before it can be trusted. This realization, painful and undeniable, became the story's emotional climax. Because the more the government defended its plan, the more it revealed a truth that cut deeper than policy. Kenya's leaders still measure safety by Western approval. Across the region, other African voices joined the chorus. Commentators in Ghana, Uganda, and Nigeria called the move a step backward. Pan-African groups began urging East African nations to build their own regional gold reserve system, a united financial infrastructure that would allow them to store, trade, and protect their gold within Africa. What began as a financial policy had become a moral awakening. The conversation was no longer about the safety of gold, but the safety of sovereignty itself. And by the time the dust settled, one truth lingered like a wound left open. A nation cannot call itself free when its wealth still sleeps beneath another man's law. The government thought it was making an economic decision, but the ripples of Kenya's gold plan went far beyond the walls of the central bank. It opened a national wound, exposing the uneasy truth that even 6 decades after independence, the line between self-governance and foreign dependence remains painfully thin. In Nairobi's markets, in Mombasa's cafes, and across rural Kenya, people began to talk about gold as if it were a mirror reflecting the country's soul. "How can we tell our children to believe in Kenya?" one shopkeeper asked, "if even our leaders don't?" For many Kenyans, the issue became personal. If the state cannot trust its own soil to protect its wealth, how can it expect ordinary citizens to trust its justice, its currency, or its elections? Teachers, clergy, and activists began framing the gold debate as a crisis of faith not in metal but in leadership. The younger generation too saw irony in the government's stance. On TikTok and X-Twitter, short clips went viral comparing images of colonial British troops shipping gold out of Africa in the 1950s with today's headlines, "Kenya sends gold to London 2025. For many, it felt like the circle of history had closed only now, with polite handshakes and financial contracts instead of bayonets. In Parliament, opposition lawmakers demanded transparency. How much gold, from which mines, under what legal terms, the government gave no precise answers. Officials insisted the quantities were modest part of a long-term diversification plan. But in a country where corruption scandals are frequent, that explanation did little to calm suspicion. Critics accused the administration of walking straight into a new form of dependency, one far subtler than colonial rule, but equally constraining. "We are exporting not just gold," said one legislator, "but control." Political analysts began linking the issue to broader concerns about Africa's strategic vulnerability. From the CFA franc in West Africa, still tied to French oversight, to frozen assets in Libya and Afghanistan, the message was clear. Whenever African wealth is stored abroad, it becomes a political weapon waiting to be used. And so Kenya's decision, though legal and rational on paper, has begun to look like a cautionary tale, a soft reminder that sovereignty without economic control is just ceremony. Perhaps the most profound consequence is not financial, but emotional. Older citizens who once celebrated independence feel betrayed, as though the flag they raised now waves over borrowed vaults. Younger citizens, educated, ambitious, globally connected, wonder if their own leaders truly believe in the nation they govern. It's a quiet erosion of confidence, and it spreads like rust. Every discussion about the gold deal becomes a discussion about everything else: the schools that never got built, the factories that closed, the promises postponed. Because in the end, this is not about gold. It's about what the gold represents: the right to believe that Africa can guard what is hers. So now, in the halls of government and in the hearts of ordinary people, one question lingers. If Kenya's wealth must still lie under the roofs of its former colonizers, then what exactly did independence achieve? That question, quiet but persistent, may become the most powerful political force of all. From Washington to London, Kenya's gold decision barely made a headline. In the corridors of global finance, it was treated as business as usual, another developing nation diversifying reserves. But to those who understand the undercurrents of power, it signaled something much larger, a quiet reaffirmation of the old world order. Because in truth, when African gold rests under Western vaults, the balance of control does not shift, it deepens. In the United States, economists view gold storage in London as a stabilizing act. It's rational, they say, given global volatility. But what they rarely mention is that this rationality keeps the US dollar and the Western banking system at the center of global trust. For decades, the dollar's strength has depended not only on America's economy, but also on the world's belief that Western systems are the only safe ones. So when Kenya sends its gold to London, it's not just reinforcing British credibility, it's indirectly reaffirming the dollar's supremacy too. Even as nations like Kenya, Ghana, and Zimbabwe talk about de-dollarization, their actions show how difficult it is to truly escape the gravitational pull of Western finance. That's why this story matters far beyond Africa. It reveals the invisible architecture of dependence that still governs the world's money. If history is any guide, the gold in London's vaults is only safe until politics says otherwise. The pattern is undeniable. Venezuela 2020, $1.9 billion in gold blocked by Britain. Libya 2011, $67 billion in sovereign funds frozen by Western powers. Afghanistan 2021, $7 billion in central bank assets seized after the Taliban takeover. Each case justified under international law. Each case proving the same truth: financial systems reflect political alliances, not neutrality. That's why many African commentators are warning Kenya may not be next, but it could be vulnerable. When your reserves sit under someone else's flag, access becomes a matter of diplomacy, not ownership. Meanwhile, new powers are offering alternatives. Russia and China have built gold-based trading systems outside Western control. The BRICS bloc is quietly discussing a gold-backed settlement currency. Even within Africa, the AIS alliance Burkina Faso Mali Niger is pushing for gold storage and digital payment networks managed on African soil. In that sense, Kenya's choice to send its gold abroad feels like a step backward away from the continental momentum towards sovereignty that figures like President Ibrahim Traore have championed. While West Africa experiments with self-reliant systems, East Africa seems to be surrendering its leverage to the same old vaults. To Western observers, Kenya's move confirms that Africa still trusts the global order. But to many Africans, it exposes the lingering shadow of dependency, the idea that even in freedom, safety must be outsourced. And perhaps that's what unsettles people the most, not the gold itself, but what it symbolizes, that the post-colonial world remains tied to pre-colonial habits dressed up as financial prudence. For older Americans watching from afar, this story echoes familiar lessons. Power rarely leaves quietly. It reinvents itself in currencies, in vaults, and in the fine print of global trust. And as long as nations like Kenya still send their wealth to London for safekeeping, the empire may be gone. But its shadow still guards the door. When Kenya decided to store its gold in London, it didn't just move metal, it moved meaning. Because gold in this story is more than wealth, it's memory. It carries the weight of empires, the silence of colonized lands, and the fragile hope of nations still trying to prove that freedom is real. The government calls it a smart decision, a safeguard against global uncertainty. But perhaps the greater uncertainty lies not in the markets, but in the minds of those who still believe that Africa's treasures are only safe when watched by someone else's eyes. History whispers its warning clearly. Every empire that ever ruled Africa began with the same logic: protection. We will keep it safe for you. And then one generation later, safety became ownership. Venezuela learned that lesson when its gold was locked away under political dispute. Libya learned it when its billions were frozen in Western banks. And if Kenya is not careful, it could learn it too, not through war, but through quiet paperwork. Because control is never taken all at once. It is surrendered one vault, one signature, one justification at a time. There is a saying in Africa: you cannot call yourself free while your house keys are in another man's pocket. If Kenya's gold lies under British law, then whose hands truly hold Kenya's keys? This question isn't just for Kenyans, it's for every nation that still measures its security by the comfort of old masters. It's for every policymaker who still believes safety requires permission. And it's for every American watching tonight, remembering that freedom too once came with a cost, and that cost was the courage to trust your own soil. So here's the challenge. If we say we own our gold, then we must be willing to guard it, refine it, and value it by our own standards. If we speak of sovereignty, it must be visible not just in speeches, but in systems. Kenya's choice should not be condemned, but it must be questioned, because silence is how dependency survives. Share this story if you believe that Africa's wealth belongs beneath African skies, and subscribe if you believe that the truth matters more than the headlines. Because in the end, the measure of independence is not in flags or constitutions, it's in who holds the keys to the vault.